The morning light in Charleston always lands the same way, soft, golden, like it's trying to forgive the city for its heat. I was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside my sketchbook, tracing lines for a porch restoration I'd been dreaming about. I'm Maribel Weller, 26, architect in training, youngest daughter of 2 parents who believed beauty could be rebuilt if you just had enough patience and sandpaper. The house on Church Street still smelled faintly of my mother's lemon polish and the ocean a few streets away. I'd been back for 2 months, telling myself it was temporary just until things settled after the accident, but things never really settle when you share a roof with Elaine. She came in barefoot, her hair twisted in yesterday's bun, voice already sharp. "Get up and clean this house. You're useless sitting there all day." The words cracked through the morning quiet like a dish hitting tile. I didn't move. My pencil stayed on the page, but my pulse drummed beneath it. For years I'd stepped back, stayed quiet, hoping calm would buy peace. It never did. I lifted my eyes, met hers, and said evenly, "This house isn't yours. Elaine, it's the inheritance you'll never see." For a moment, the only sound was the ceiling fan. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if the air had changed. I pushed my sketchbook aside, picked up my coffee, and walked past her toward the porch. Outside, the humidity met me like a wall. The magnolia tree hummed with cicadas, and somewhere down the street a church bell began to ring. I stood there, breathing in the salt, heavy air, knowing that after this morning, nothing inside that house would ever feel the same again. 2 months earlier, I drove down I-26 with my mother's old suitcase on the passenger seat and the smell of burnt coffee in the air. The highway signs felt too familiar, the kind that lead not to adventure but to the past you swore you'd outgrow. Charleston shimmered in the distance, heat rising from the marshes like a mirage. I told myself it was just for a while, a few weeks, maybe a month, just until I could breathe again. The funeral had emptied me out. After the crash, Atlanta felt impossible, blueprints blurred under tears. Clients whispered condolences that never reached my heart. Home was supposed to be where grief could land softly. Elaine was already there when I arrived, sitting on the porch swing, glass of wine in hand. Her divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. She looked tired but relieved, like she'd survived a storm and didn't care what wreckage it left. When she hugged me, I felt the same bones, the same heartbeat we used to share as children under this very roof. For the first week, we moved quietly around each other. We cooked from Mom's old recipes, folded laundry together, and stayed up late sorting through boxes of photographs. We even laughed once over Dad's terrible handwriting on an old grocery list. It almost felt like healing. But grief has a way of mutating when there's too much silence. By week 3, Elaine had started organizing things, switching out the curtains, moving Mom's piano to the corner, changing the Wi-Fi password without telling me, just trying to keep the house running, she said with that bright, brittle tone she used on everyone but me. Then came the bills. She took them over too. And the master bedroom. "You'll be fine in the guest room," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. I didn't argue. I unpacked my suitcase upstairs and told myself it didn't matter, that walls were just walls. But each night, as I listened to her footsteps crossing the floorboards that used to be mine, I realized something had shifted. Home was no longer a refuge. It had quietly become a battlefield. By late July, the house no longer smelled like lemon polish, but like Elaine's perfume and burnt champagne. She'd decided that Sundays were now for brunch with the girls, as if our parents' dining room were some downtown cafe. I was in the kitchen early that morning, whisking eggs and slicing fruit because she'd told me, not asked, to help. "Make it look nice." "Okay," she said, breezing past in a silk robe. "We need to keep this place presentable." When her friends arrived, they filled the house with laughter too loud for its size. Charleston heat pressed against the windows, and I stayed mostly in the kitchen, washing pans that didn't need washing just to avoid their eyes. Through the half-open door, I heard one of them ask, "So, Elaine?" What's your sister doing now? Elaine's laugh came sharp. Practiced. Still chasing her little architect dreams. I think. Draws houses, but can't afford one. Bless her heart. They laughed, and something in me cracked a soundless fracture I felt in my ribs. I kept stirring the batter even after it had gone smooth, just to keep my hands busy. When brunch ended, the guests left lipstick stains on glasses and perfumed air in their wake. Elaine didn't thank me. She just dropped her plate in the sink and said, "You missed a spot on the counter," before heading upstairs with her phone pressed to her ear. The kitchen was a war zone of crumbs and half-empty mimosas. I stood there, staring at the mess. My reflection in the dark oven door looked tired, faded, almost unrecognizable. I'd spent weeks believing that silence kept peace, that patience was strength. But looking at those dirty dishes, I realized what silence had really done. It had made her think I'd accepted this. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands on a towel, and felt something new settle inside me. Not rage, but resolve. That night, long after Elaine had fallen asleep, I whispered into the dark, my voice steady for the first time in months. No more. I spent the next morning sitting on the porch, where the paint still peeled in the same places my mother and I had tried to cover years ago. I was 10 then, wearing her old t-shirt as a paint smock, laughing every time a drop landed on my nose. She told me a home was like skin, you had to care for it or it would start to show the years. Back then, this house felt alive. My father's humming floated through the open windows as he sanded the banister, shaping each curve by hand. The wood dust mixed with the smell of my mother's gardenias, and together they made a kind of perfume I've never found anywhere else. Those were the years when the house breathed with us, not against us. Now, every floorboard groaned like it was holding back something unsaid. Elaine's shoes clicked across the hardwood, the same path Dad used to walk when he came home from work, calling for us to set the table. I couldn't look at the staircase without seeing the day of the funeral, the black dresses, the sound of Elaine's heels, the lawyer's voice reading out our parents' will in this very living room after she went out that afternoon. I found the folder again in the desk drawer. The legal language blurred in places where my tears had once fallen, but one line stood out this time. Maribel Weller shall hold this house in stewardship for the family. Stewardship. A word that sounded noble in the lawyer's voice, but now it felt like a chain around my throat. What did it even mean to hold a house in stewardship for a family that no longer existed the way it used to? Did it mean preserve it, protect it, or just keep it frozen in time, waiting for someone else to claim it? I traced my fingers over the signatures, my father's firm, my mother's looping, and tried to breathe. I wanted to honor them, not trap myself in their shadow. Outside, a storm was building over the harbor, clouds folding into each other like fists. I folded the will back into its envelope and stood up. Maybe breaking free didn't mean leaving. Maybe it meant redefining what home was before someone else decided for me. The rain hadn't let up since morning. Charleston streets gleamed like mirrors as I hurried down Queen Street, my umbrella bending in the wind. The cafe was half empty, just the hiss of espresso and the smell of cinnamon. I spotted Noah Kemp in the corner, same posture he had back in college, one hand always on a pen even when he wasn't writing. He stood when he saw me. That soft grin that used to make study nights bearable. "Maribel Weller," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "You look like you could use something stronger than coffee." I managed a laugh. "You have no idea." I handed him the folder I'd carried everywhere lately, the will, the deed, the letters from the lawyer after my parents died. Noah flipped through them, brow furrowing, his coffee cooling untouched. He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me when I said, "Elaine thinks this house belongs to both of us." He finally looked up. "It doesn't. You're the sole owner, Maribel, legally. That house is yours." Relief washed through me, brief and dizzying. Then he added, but legal truth doesn't always bring peace. I stared at him. You mean I shouldn't confront her? He leaned back. Not yet. Document everything. Dates, expenses, things she says or does that overstep. Keep a record. If this escalates, and it might, you'll need more than feelings. You'll need proof. I nodded slowly. He was talking like a lawyer, but his eyes softened. Also, he said, update the deed. Right now, it's in your name. But if anything happens, that stewardship clause could give her leverage. Protect yourself before you protect the memory of your parents. The words stung because they were true. I'd spent months clinging to the house like it was a shrine, forgetting that even sacred things can be taken from you if you don't defend them. We talked until the rain eased, before leaving. Noah reached across the table. You're not crazy for wanting peace, but don't confuse silence with peace either. That night, I found a small leather notebook in my mother's old sewing drawer and opened it to the first page. I wrote down the date. Then one sentence Elaine told me today that I don't contribute anything to this house. The ink bled slightly on the paper. I pressed my pen harder, as if writing the truth could keep me from disappearing inside it. The air inside the house had changed since the storm. The humidity clung to everything papers curled. Wood swelled, and even the silence felt swollen. Heavy. I was in the study that morning, sorting through a drawer of old tax forms and faded letters. It wasn't a search for anything, not really just a way to quiet my mind. That's when I found it. A thin blue folder tucked beneath a stack of magazines. Too clean to have been my parents'. I pulled it out, the label handwritten in neat, deliberate letters, estate documents update. Inside. My breath caught. It was a will, our parents' will, but the names were wrong. My name was crossed out in pencil, replaced with Elaine's in slanted handwriting that mimicked my mother's almost perfectly. The date was changed too, postmarked months after the accident. I ran my finger over the ink, the tremor in my hand steadying only when anger took its place. When Elaine came home that afternoon, I was waiting in the kitchen, the folder open on the table. What is this? I asked, my voice low. She blinked once, then smiled. Too easily. I was just making sure things were organized. You know how messy the legal stuff got after the crash. I thought you'd rewrite history. Her expression hardened. Don't be dramatic. I'm protecting both of us. You've always been too emotional for this kind of responsibility. I just corrected it before you made mistakes. I laughed, sharp and cold, protecting us by forging our parents' signatures. Her eyes flashed with something feral shame. Maybe, or the absence of it. You think I'm stealing. I'm saving what's left of this family. For a moment, I almost pitied her, the desperation to control what she feared losing. Then I saw the pen marks again in my mind. My name erased like it never belonged there. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to. The memory was already engraved, precise as ink on legal paper. Fear had no place left to live inside me, in its space. Something colder took root. Determination. I gathered the forged document, sealed it in an envelope, and slipped it into my own locked drawer. This time, I wasn't keeping it for memory. I was keeping it for evidence. By Thursday, the house was spotless, not because Elaine asked, but because I wanted control over something again. The table was set with our mother's porcelain, the kind we used to save for holidays. I cooked quietly, the sound of the knife on the cutting board steady, measured. Every movement was deliberate, every breath rehearsed. Tonight wasn't about food, it was about truth. When I called Elaine that morning, she'd sounded amused. Dinner. Finally deciding to talk like adults, her tone was syrupy sweet. I said yes. I told her to come at 7 and to bring an appetite. She had no idea that Noah would be there too. The first to arrive was Noah, carrying a leather folder instead of flowers. He looked at me, searching my face. You're sure about this? I'm done being quiet, I said. Elaine swept in a few minutes later. wearing perfume thick enough to fill the room before her voice did. "Well, this looks lovely," she said, seating herself at the head of the table. "Nice to see you playing hostess for once." "Maribel." We ate in brittle politeness. Elaine talked about redecorating, about turning the study into her creative office. I let her speak, her confidence building with each sip of wine. When her glass was nearly empty, Noah cleared his throat. "Before dessert," he said, setting the folder on the table, "I'd like to read something." Elaine laughed. "Oh, God, is this a toast?" He opened the folder, unfolded a document, and began to read. His voice was calm, but each word cut sharper than any argument we'd ever had. Last will and testament of James and Lydia Weller. Sole beneficiary Maribel Weller. The clink of her glass stopped mid-air. Her eyes darted between us. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, but the paper lay between the candles. Irrefutable. Noah met her stare. "This is the original. Notarized and verified. Anything else you found or edited is void." Elaine's smirk faltered, then disappeared completely. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive. For once. It belonged to me. I reached for my glass, my hand steady, and took a slow sip. The house had never sounded so quiet, or so free. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt wax. The will still lay on the table between the three of us, candlelight trembling over the signatures that ended every argument Elaine thought she could win. For a long moment, no one moved. Then she did. Her chair scraped against the wood as she stood, her face twisting through disbelief into fury. "You planned this," she hissed. "Both of you. You're trying to make me look insane. No one's trying to make you anything," I said quietly. "We're just done pretending." She slammed her hand on the table, the porcelain rattling. "You think you can just erase me? I've been taking care of this house, paying bills, holding everything together while you sat around sketching your little fantasies." Noah leaned back, calm but alert. "Elaine, the legal record is clear. The house belongs solely to Maribel. You know that now." Her laugh cracked like glass. "You're not even family. Stay out of this." Then she turned to me, eyes wet but still sharp. "You wouldn't even survive without me. You never could." I rose slowly. "I'm not throwing you out. Elaine," I said. "You left when you stopped being my sister." Something in her gaze faltered then, like a wire snapping. She didn't answer. She just walked past me, her perfume mixing with the candle smoke. Upstairs. Drawers opened, closed, then silence. By morning, she was gone. Her car's taillights vanished down the street just as the sun began to rise over the harbor. The house felt strange, lighter, but also hollow, like the air after a storm that's taken something with it. Noah came by at noon with the finalized statement from the courthouse. We signed quietly at the kitchen counter, our voices low, the paper crisp between us. When he left, I sat alone in the living room, listening to the soft creak of the floorboards, the same ones my father once sanded by hand. For the first time in months, the house exhaled. It didn't feel like victory. It just felt like air. Days passed like the slow clearing of smoke after a fire. The house stayed quiet. Too quiet at first. No footsteps, no clinking of Elaine's bracelets, no faint music leaking from her room upstairs. I thought I'd savor the silence, but it pressed on my chest instead, heavy with everything we'd lost. The first morning alone, I found a hairline crack running down the hallway wall, thin but deep, the kind that creeps in unnoticed until it's too late. I remembered my father kneeling there years ago, a trowel in one hand and me beside him, holding a cup of plaster like it was treasure. Houses breathe. He told me, and sometimes, they break a little when we do. So I mixed the plaster the way he used to, too much water at first, then more powder until it felt right between my fingers. I patched the wall slowly, smoothing each stroke, the motion steadying my breath. When it dried, the seam looked faint, almost invisible, but I knew it was there, proof that mending doesn't erase the wound, only makes it stronger. Noah stopped by that afternoon, bringing coffee and the quiet steadiness I'd come to expect from him. He stood by the doorway, watching the patch on the wall. "You did that yourself." I nodded. "Dad taught me." He smiled, soft and tired. Then he'd be proud. We sat at the table where everything had unraveled and, somehow, begun again. I admitted that I still felt guilty that part of me kept replaying Elaine's face when she left. Noah reached across the table, his hand warm against mine. "You didn't destroy your family. Mari," he said, "you just stopped letting it destroy you." The words landed quietly, but they settled deep, for the first time since the accident. I believed him. The house around us seemed to breathe again, not in pain, but in peace. 3 months later, the city felt different, lighter somehow, as if Charleston itself had exhaled after a long silence. Mornings came earlier now. The harbor light spilled across the rooftops, gilding the porches and iron balconies that had survived more storms than I could count. I'd named my new studio Second Porch Designs, a nod to the place where everything had started, the porch where my mother taught me to paint, where my father fixed old hinges, where I learned that rebuilding wasn't just about wood and nails, but about patience. The work was small but steady, restoring houses, drafting plans for neighbors who wanted to keep history alive instead of tearing it down. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that belonged to me. Elaine sent a postcard last week from Columbia, a picture of a garden, a short note in her looping script. "Doing fine. Hope you are too." I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into a drawer. We weren't sisters the way we used to be, but we weren't enemies either, just two people finally breathing separate air. This morning, I stood on the porch with my coffee, the same chipped blue mug my father once glued back together after I dropped it. The crack still ran down one side, thin but visible, a quiet reminder that not all repairs are meant to disappear. The street was waking up, a cyclist passing, a woman walking her dog, the hum of life returning. I looked around the house, the patched walls, the worn banister, the sunlight pouring through open windows, and felt the calm settle in my chest. This house finally breathes not with anger, but with peace I built myself.